Welcome back to Hacking the Truth. I'm James Trinkle Clements.
And I'm Bob Wallace.
Bob, I saw this promo for a movie called Planet of the Humans. And I thought it was going to be like Planet of the Apes, like a sci-fi. So I said that ought to be pretty cool, so let's watch it. Guess what? It wasn't anything like that. It was the canary in the mine, so to speak, about what we're doing about or trying to do about going green and how can we go green. I think most people would agree if we can create energy and have less impact on the planet, it's a good thing to do. But it is very convoluted getting there. What did you take from the movie?
Well, first, it's not a denial of the problem at all. We know we've had certain famous people that have said, oh, it's all a bunch of nonsense and all this. This documentary was done by a very ardent environmentalist who was saying we're going in the wrong direction, we're wasting enormous resources, we're causing damage to the environment while we're wasting billions of dollars in doing this. So it was an eye-opener for me. Very much so, and I like to remind our viewers, please hit the subscribe button and the bell and get all the new updates that we will send you on different topics. All right.
Yeah, and I think it lended a lot of credence to it that this fellow was an environmentalist and really felt the same way that most people do. We know, I mean, in the 60s, and he pointed out, and you and I were alive in the 60s, when the Hudson River caught on fire in New York, when the water was so polluted, animals would drink it and die. We called it green tide or whatever we called it, but it was a commonplace. You'd hear news reports of we had a tremendous die for the fishes in the river, and we didn't know why. We had no idea these plants were dumping all their waste in the rivers back then. Yeah,
I think in 1958, that was when Rachel Carson came out with her famous book, and that really started the environmental movement. And I really, for the people who are listening, I really want to reiterate, we're not anti-environmentalists.
Oh, not at all.
We're anti-fake environmentalists who are wasting all our resources. That's what we're against, and that's what this man was against.
I think I can best put it to bed in my mind, and when I think about it, so many things have started out with the right intentions, but they get hijacked by a group of people, and it's flawed science, but they don't want to go back and admit that maybe they were wrong. It won't work this way. We need to drop back, come up with a new formula, because we're causing more destruction than the good we're doing. But they won't do it. Their egos or whatever the driving force behind them, they feel this surge of power, and it comes back to the human being. That ego won't let them let go of this concept.
Well, and also, when they're looking to see, are we being successful, they're looking at their bank accounts. They're not looking at the environment. So as long as they're successful in making a lot of money, they're not going to stop what they're doing.
Well, and we're talking about the movie, The Planet of the Humans, and it's a documentary, and really great movie to watch. No, and you're finding out the big corporations do the same thing with any type of project that they do with elections. They'll give $1 million to the Democrat and give $1 million to the Republican. They're hedging their bet. So they don't know where it's going, but they know if it's going to change, and we're going to buy or build this type of plant, because we know if it goes in that direction, then the government subsidies and the money coming our way will be hundreds of millions or trillions of dollars in grants, and we will get rich. We will buy our stock. We will have our stock at $3 that goes to $120. Yeah. And that's what happens.
Well, you know the old story that the definition of a leader is someone who sees a mob and gets in the front of it.
Yeah.
Well, in essence, that's what they do. They see a movement and look for the opportunities to make money. And usually that involves derailing a large part of the purpose of the group. But for example, they could care less about conservation. They don't mind destroying habitats. There was the thing about the Joshua tree. They were just, it was hard to watch a dump, what do you call those things?
Well, it was a front-end loader with a chopper.
Loader, yeah, just going through all these 500-plus-year-old plants.
5,000.
5,000. And just
trees.
Plowing them down. I mean, it was painful to see. I'm very fond of old plants and trees because they remind me of the old ancient world. I really like that. So it was hard to watch them do that. Not to mention that they actually got a permit to kill eagles without penalty because they were killing so many eagles and other raptors. They said in 1 year they found out like 4,900 that had been killed.
Flying into the wind farms.
And I can remember in the past where one eagle being shot was like a national event and would be in the newspapers, and the guy that shot the eagle would go to jail and all the rest. Now they're killing. So it just shows you they're not conservationists.
No, not at all.
They couldn't care less. And it's been pointed out they're doing a lot of these projects in the desert. The desert is not just a pile of sand, it's a whole ecosystem. Right? Which normally is the goal is to preserve these things. And they're fragile because it's a very harsh climate, harsh area, and it needs very intricate mechanisms for everything to survive. And they're just plowing it all down.
Well, I think one of the real telltale signs of where this can go and go very wrong, it's when he visited this city that was supposed to be the utopia of green energy in this massive area out in the desert with the solar panels and the wind. And he went out there to look for it and says, well, where is it? Just collapsed.
Yeah.
I mean, the mirrors were broken, the wind farm, which have a life, it is not renewable, it's replaceable energy. And I think that's what most people don't understand. If it's renewable, it keeps renewing itself. When the wind farm goes bad, you've got to tear them down and rebuild them. When the solar panels are gone, you've got to get rid of them and replace them. Tremendous money it takes.
And a use of a lot of resources.
Talk about the rare earth minerals it takes to build solar panels and the environmental footprint on that of the giant wind farms. It's not cost effective, and without government subsidies, if it was in the private hands, it would never get done.
Right. The success of wind, solar, and biomass has been greatly exaggerated. You remember one of the stories that they give is they're having Earth Day.
Yes.
And they were boasting, they're pounding themselves on their chest. This whole thing, all the electricity for this event is being generated by solar panels. And what was the truth?
It wasn't. It was a generator in the back. They had solar panels, and the guy said, well, maybe it could run a microwave oven or something, or a toaster oven. With these solar panels, we couldn't power the whole thing. And so it's just, you know, the Wizard of Oz. When you lift up the curtain, what's behind it.
Right. And this isn't just an isolated event.
No, it's not.
Right. Almost all the uses of green power are backed up by regular fossil fuel delivery. And one of the problems of it is that if you can use those types of fuel, you have to have a backup for when they fail, because they always fail. We have no wind, we have no sun, we have harsh conditions that make it so they don't work. It's hard to keep all these other plants online, and it's very difficult to start and stop them, for the fossil fuel plants. So it's not an efficient method of doing anything. So you have this thing where money's being poured into all these ways of doing it, and at the same time it's not efficient. They're lying about its efficiencies. Even, it's not just us, the European, they say Germany claims this high rate of using these same ways, and it's really down like 4 or 5%. It really doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying that 500 years from now they won't have something the size of a quarter that would run a city, but they're not there yet, and now it's extremely wasteful. It's like building this whole thing before you know how to do it.
Yeah, it's very wasteful. Will we ever have the technology? I think we probably can. But it shouldn't be this gigantic monetary experiment. I like it left in private hands if they want to develop it, very much like Elon Musk is going into space. Those and you know, if an electric car is viable, which they are not right now, and the reason is, if you can't charge them, they don't work. The capacity of the battery, if it's cold or extremely hot, is down by 30 to 40%. So you can go maybe 100 or 150 miles. What if you have an emergency and you can't get to a charger? I mean, there's so many holes in electric cars right now, I wouldn't touch them. Hybrid cars, I think, is a great idea.
Yeah.
That recharge the battery as they go. I think that's the way to go because that's a backup system.
Right. Well, and also, what's behind all of it? Fossil fuel electricity.
Yeah.
So it's...
Well, I saw a video, Scotty Kilmer, who is a mechanic. He does a lot of videos on YouTube. And he's a go-to guy if you want to know about a car. But he talked about the electric cars and made a lot of common sense about why they're not going to work the way they're purported to work. They can't. So he said, for instance, in Texas, let's say we would have had 50% electric cars, and everybody gets home and they plug them in to charge them. One car is like 5 ceramic heaters. That's how much power. He said you'd have a brownout when everybody got home. You can't produce that much energy at those peak times when everybody gets home. So it's just not going to work. But the problem is we're going to be taxed to death to be as an experiment.
Yeah. Well, this is another example of crony capitalism, which we've talked about many times over the years, where they don't really care what the outcome is. It's just getting that juicy contract and making all that money, and everybody goes home.
Yeah.
I remember in the video they have some interviews with Al Gore, and he basically, when they asked him questions, he couldn't even answer them because he pretends to be an environmentalist, but in truth, I don't think he is.
He's an opportunist.
He's an opportunist, yeah. He's in there to make money. Now, I don't fault him for wanting to make money. That's not a problem. But the thing is, as that man pointed out who made the documentary, we have a very serious problem that's now not really being faced because they think they have a solution.
Yeah.
But it's a false solution.
I'm James Trinkle. Clements, that's Bob Wallace. We're talking about the movie Planet of the Humans. Please hit the subscribe button and the bell. Be notified of upcoming videos. Yeah, and that's what we come to is, it sounds good, but we really don't have investigative journalism the way we used to. Let's explore, what if it doesn't work? Where will we be? Yeah. We rush into these things thinking, hey, when we were growing up, Bob, what happened to the cars we're supposed to get in and fly to work? Remember that? In the late 50s and early 60s. Yeah. That was it. And we saw in Life magazine the cities we're going to be living in the year 2000 and all this. And actually, there were people predicting that we would have a winter that would extend all the way down past South Carolina, and we'd be in a, you know, it's just so much of science is flawed because you pick and choose who you want to represent your narrative, and you put them up as an authority. But when you look behind the curtain, they have not done the research.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've talked about this a number of times, almost all experts in the public forum have an agenda that they're trying to put out for somebody else. It's not true science. It's not that they follow the truth no matter where it goes. They already have the answer. They're really salesmen more than they're scientists.
They are, and what's happening in the colleges, and they'll say, well, this scientist from Harvard or wherever, they're given grants to explore this, and they know the narrative they're supposed to come up with, or they don't get the grant money.
Yeah.
That's been exposed long ago. So they're going to come up with that narrative and present to whatever group or government wants to hear, and then be posed as an authority. So how much of an authority is that?
Right.
So where do we go? What do we do? One of the most telling things in the video, Planet of the Humans, was talking about the last 200 years and the population growth. We will run out of resources. And you made a good point about you look back at ancient history and you think Machu Picchu and had a great civilization. Where did all those people go? Where did the desert people go? Well, they probably started out as 500 people, but when it got to 5,000, they didn't have the resources to support 5,000, so they just left.
Yeah.
And that's what
happened to animals as well.
Yes.
It's interesting. A lot of people think that Darwin was saying in evolution that it's the survival of the fittest. Well, it just so happened in many cases the fittest were the ones that died first, because they were the huge sharks, the huge crocodiles that couldn't get enough to eat in their environment. They exhausted their own environment and died. So it's sort of ironic that the best predator actually ended up killing themselves by destroying their environment. And who's the best predator right now?
I was going to say, who's the apex predator?
We're the apex predator.
Well, yeah. And you get back to the human condition and you have to ask yourself, how much is enough? I've said this a lot. How much money is enough? How much do you need to be comfortable? How big of a house do you need? And I see it here at the beach. They'll tear down a $700,000 house and put up a $2 million house. It's 3 stories high on a footprint of a lot that should never be. But they get variances to do it because it's going to bring more taxes in. So you look at every segment, and really the problems we have is not outside of us. It lies in human nature, and if we don't correct human nature, it doesn't make any difference.
Right. To continue on what you were saying about going back in the past, he basically said in the last 200 years we now have 10 times as many people, and each of those people is using 10 times the resources that people used 200 years ago.
Oh, easily.
If you ever go to any of the museums in the counties in Florida and you look at which really did a lot for how people lived back then, they had almost no resources at all. Their carbon footprint was non-existent. They were hardly using up any resources. In fact, they weren't using any electricity or oil or any of the things that we consume now. So basically what the author of this was saying was, we have 10 times as many people using 10 times as much resources, each one. So in effect, we're using 100 times, I know this is a little bit of a generalization, but we were using 100 times the resources we were using 200 years ago. Can we accelerate that pace? I don't see how we can.
No, I don't think we can. And there are people who are growing their own vegetables, who have community gardens, who are doing these things in small districts, even within cities or counties. When I'd go visit my friend Blaine and stay with him for a couple weeks in Pennsylvania, well, his sister raised chickens. She sold the eggs. She made soap. The Amish were in the community, friends with the Amish. So there's ways of doing it. And it was beautiful land and it was uncrowded. To me, you talk about heaven on earth, towns like that are pretty much close to it when you know your neighbors and the situations that we dream about. But the consumption we have, it's just, it can't continue. Yeah. We're poisoning the oceans, there's no doubt about it. And it's all, most of it's about greed. About what can we take from it.
We need to have like a blood test for sociopaths and narcissists, okay? And so that you're automatically disqualified from running a company and having public office.
Are we going to turn
that would solve all our problems.
Or Soylent Green, remember the movie? You turn the people you don't want, you turn them into food.
I think it was 30 years old, right?
Yeah, 30 years old. Uh-oh.
That might have been Logan's Run. I'm not sure which it was.
No, that was Logan, but Soylent Green was, you'd go into a bye-bye land and be processed. Yeah. Or the Twilight Zone, where To Serve Man is a cookbook.
Yeah, that's a grim future. But
so again, let's go back to what can we do now? I think we look to government too much, and government is so faulty. I mean, if you're talking about this current stimulus package being $1.9 trillion, 30, 40 years ago, that was more than the whole budget for the country.
Yeah, more than gross national product times some factor. Yeah.
So what we're doing, you cannot continue. So the result of it, if we continue on this path, is going to be what? Starvation? What if we have a winter where it gets colder rather than warmer and crops have a smaller cycle to grow in? And they pointed out the peak agricultural production was the year 2000, and it's gone down ever since. How many people have we added in the last 21 years?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds doomsday-ish, but we've got to do something.
Well, I think the demise of the middle class is telling. Right? The poor are getting their stipends and all the rest of that, and the rich have their ways of getting money, but everybody in the middle, who is really the true consumers, are starting to suffer, and their class is being destroyed. So it could be we're going to end up in the South American way of doing it, where you just have one very rich group that's taken care of and lives separate and has their own cities, their own town, not just subdivisions, they have their own cities, and everybody else is going to be really poor. And you know what that sounds like? The plot of a science fiction movie.
Sounds like socialism to me, or communism.
Yeah.
Pretty much what it is.
It's a tyranny, that's for sure.
It's tyranny, yeah. So is that what it, and I said this, and I mentioned it several times on my radio show in 1980. I said, if this population, especially the entitlement population, black, white, Hispanic, whatever it is, if it grows to a certain point and you have more people that need subsidies than will work and they drain the resources, I don't know, will there be a civil war? What's going to happen? Because you cannot continue to support them, and that population grows exponentially larger than the other population. I called it a tidal wave. Well, I think the tidal wave has started to hit. Our inner cities are war zones. And you look at Chicago, Detroit, New York, the people who are killed, you know, the ongoing effects of the lack of personal responsibility on both sides. On that side, who sends them to money to keep doing it, on this side, who does nothing about it, who leaves them impoverished.
You know, I don't think there's one solution, because all the problems in the environmental area are almost identical to the ones in the political area. It's the same thing, both mechanisms are working the same. So there isn't one solution, except for some genetic change of our consciousness, so we become good stewards of the earth and good stewards of our countries. I'm not sure how we're going to survive all this.
I'm not either, but I do know the basis of human nature we have right now, most of it is greed and power. And that's why we don't have term limits, why we don't have new people coming in with different ideas. The way the power structure is set up in Washington now, which is really the basis of the problem, because you have people who want less government and get out of my life, and you have people who say government needs to take care of this.
Well, in a way, one of the things we're saying is that government is one of the problems for the conservative movement, really. At one time, I think it was good when we created all our national parks and tried to preserve our resources. Otherwise, as you and I have mentioned, there'd be no sequoia trees, no redwood trees, wouldn't be anything. So they did do a lot of good, but somewhere along the line, the whole thing got perverted and turned into money, power, and greed.
Well, it goes back to the individual. And I've said many times, as hard as it is, I try to leave the world alone and try to improve myself. But it's hard to turn a blind eye to when you see situations and people self-destructing.
Yeah. And another thing this is a warning about is the simple solution. All we have to do is have green energy, everything will take care of itself.
No, you'll still have greed, you'll still have bad government, and you'll still have everything else.
Right.
And
people in in politics, they have the simple solution. Everybody likes to jump on a simple solution. So we know that in the future, there's going to be more larger and more protracted problems. And we all need to resist the temptation to do a simple solution, because it's not going to be one.
And I think one of the biggest obstacles we have now is the media, that talk about someone that's biased or doesn't, all they want to report is what's bad. Yeah. What's a news flash, breaking news. No, it's not. It's the same situation, just different people over and over again. Give me some solution, tell me something you've investigated, help me to learn something. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I guess what we need to look at is they're certainly one of the institutions, and they are an institution that could help a lot.
Yeah.
You know, instead of not covering the fact that the turbines all froze in Texas.
Yeah.
And multiple other things, and the fact that some of the numbers that are given about the effectiveness of solar and wind are actually false, and show that we are dependent on fossil fuels, and currently there's no way that we can get around that, and so we're not facing the problem.
Well, even Bill Gates has come out and said and claims he is building a nuclear power plant that is very safe now. We have the technology, and that 40% of the power in Europe is nuclear. That's never talked about because we've had some problems. Certainly we've had Chernobyl. Let me tell you, Russia, the technology and the workmanship in Russia is bad. I'm surprised the Skylab, where we have the Skylab, they have Soyuz 8 or whatever they call it, is bad. But I'm not surprised something like that happened. But if we can build those plants on a smaller scale, even 50% of the energy, and start working toward what is renewable and not replaceable.
I mean, look at airplanes. They were a new technology at one time. They really haven't been around that long. And they were routinely falling out of the sky and crashing. Well, what if we had said, well, obviously they're not safe. We need to do away with airplanes, right? No, you have to power through and learn how to do them better. And now the safety record of airlines is very, very good. And the same thing could be said of nuclear power. The technology in the beginning was not perfect, and there were mistakes. And we've talked about Japan, which was the last disaster, I'm not quite sure why they put it where they put it, but I guess maybe in Japan they're on fault lines all over the place.
Yeah,
so they really don't have much choice. But you mentioned to me a while ago that actually there's a solution to that where they don't have to use the water anymore. They can use, what was it?
Sodium.
Sodium.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there are solutions to these things, but in the private sector, I think probably that's going to be where it's going to come from, because number one, government's inefficient and government's very slow.
Right.
And that's what happens.
And when you hear people badmouth nuclear, you need to look at, well, where are they making money?
Yes.
Right? You can't take their word for it. Honest to goodness, scientists and experts these days are very suspect.
They are. Well, the movie is called Planet of the Humans. We highly recommend it. Take a look at it, see what you think, let us know. Please hit the subscribe button and the little bell down there, and we will see you next time on Hacking the Truth. I'm James Trinkle Clements.
I'm Bob Wallace.
Take care.